Most of us would like to think that most people are good and kind. We like to think that people aren't capable of unspeakable acts that should only exist in works of fiction. Here are history's 5 most notorious serial killers that will make you doubt your faith in humanity. Number 5. Jack the Ripper. In 1888, Jack the Ripper was an unnamed serial killer who preyed in the London's Whitechapel district. The killer was dubbed the Whitechapel Murderer and Leather Apron in both criminal case files and contemporary journalistic reporting. Female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of London's East End were frequently targeted by Jack the Ripper. Prior to the abdominal mutilations, their throats were cut. Internal organs were removed from at least 3 of the victims, leading to speculation that their killer had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. In September and October 1888, rumors that the murders were linked grew louder, and media outlets and Scotland Yard received numerous letters from people claiming to be the killer. The name Jack the Ripper came from a letter made by a man claiming to be the murderer and widely circulated in the press. The letter is commonly regarded to be a fake, prepared by journalists in an attempt to generate interest in the subject and increase circulation of their publications. George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee received a from hell letter that included part of a preserved human kidney, supposedly retrieved from one of the victims. Because of both the exceptionally violent nature of the murders and the media coverage of the crimes, the public began to believe in a single serial killer, known as Jack the Ripper. The Ripper gained significant and sustained international notoriety as a result of extensive newspaper coverage, and the mythology grew stronger. A police inquiry into a sequence of 11 savage murders in Whitechapel and Spitalfields between 1888 and 1891 found no compelling evidence linking all of the crimes to the 1888 murders. The canonical 5, Marion Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were murdered between August 31 and November 9, 1888. Their killings are often thought to be linked. The killings went unsolved, and the traditions that surrounded them became a mix of historical inquiry, mythology, and pseudo-history. Number 4. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, born on May 21, 1960, was an American serial killer and sex offender who murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. He was also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. Necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, typically all or part of the skeleton, were also common themes in his later killings. Dahmer was ruled to be legally sane at his trial, despite having been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder. On February 17, 1992, he was found guilty of 15 of the 16 murders he had committed in Wisconsin, and he was sentenced to 15 life sentences. For an extra homicide committed in Ohio in 1978, he was sentenced to a 16th life sentence. And was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Prison, on November 28, 1994. Number 3. Harold Shipman. Harold Frederick Shipman, also known as Fred Shipman, was an English general practitioner who is thought to be one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. He was born on January 14, 1946, and died on January 13, 2004. He was convicted guilty of the murders of 15 patients under his care on January 31, 2000. His total number of deaths was estimated to be 250. Shipman was condemned to life in jail with the intent of never being released. On the 13th of January 2004, a day before his 58th birthday, he committed suicide by hanging himself in his cell at HM Prison Wakefield in West Yorkshire. Shipman's crimes were investigated by the Shipman Inquiry, a 2-year examination chaired by Dame Janet Smith into all deaths certified by Shipman. The investigation found 218 victims, putting his total number of victims at 250, with around 80% of them being older women. Shipman's youngest documented victim was a 41-year-old man, though there was speculation that he had murdered children as young as 4. Although other physicians have been acquitted of comparable crimes or convicted on lesser charges, he is the first British doctor to have been found guilty of murdering his patients. Number 2. John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, often known as the Killer Clown, was an American serial killer and sex offender who assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men. Gacy used to act as Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown in children's hospitals and philanthropic events. He was also a Democratic Party precinct captain and a building contractor in his community. According to Gacy, he carried out all of his murders in his ranch house near Norridge, Illinois, in the Chicago metropolitan area. He would typically bring a victim to his house, deceive him into putting on handcuffs under the guise of displaying a magic act, then rape and torture his victim before killing him by asphyxiation or strangulation with a garrote. 26 victims were buried in his home's crawl area, with 3 more buried elsewhere on his property. 4 of them were thrown into the Des Plaines River. In 1968, Gacy was found guilty of sodomizing a teenage boy in Waterloo, Iowa, and was sentenced to 10 years in jail, but only served 18 months. After his divorce from his second wife, in 1976, he murdered at least 30 more people. He murdered his first victim in 1972, twice more by the end of 1975, and at least 30 more by the end of 1976. Gacy was apprehended on December 21, 1978, after an inquiry into the disappearance of Des Plaines juvenile Robert Piest. His conviction for 33 homicides by one person set a record for the most homicides in U.S. legal history. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was sentenced to death. Number 1. Ted Bundy. Theodore Robert Bundy was a serial murderer in the United States who kidnapped, raped, and murdered a number of young women and girls in the 1970s and probably earlier. He confessed to 30 homicides committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978 after more than a decade of denials. His true number of victims is unknown and could be far more. Bundy was thought to be attractive and personable, qualities he used to gain the trust of his victims and society. He would approach his victims in public places, claiming injury or impersonating an authority figure before knocking them out. He returned to his victims on occasion, grooming and performing sexual acts with their decomposing bodies until putrefaction and wild animal devastation rendered any further encounters impossible. He decapitated at least 12 people and stored some of the severed heads in his flat as mementos. He broke into homes at night on a few occasions and bludgeoned his victims while they slept. Bundy was arrested and imprisoned for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal violence in Utah in 1975. He was then named as a suspect in a growing number of unsolved homicides across numerous states. Faced with murder accusations in Colorado, he staged 2 spectacular escapes and carried out additional assaults in Florida before being apprehended in 1978. In 2 trials for the Florida homicides, he received 3 death sentences. On January 24, 1989, he was executed at the Florida State Prison at Rayford.